Let's do this dance. All right, today we're discussing invasive species and endangered species. Ooh, yummy. So, we got lots of examples to talk about, lots of reasons, things we need to look out for. And here's one thing that you guys need to think about. Y'all live in a world now. So, the estimate is from about 1800 to about 2100 when you guys make it to the century mark, or close to it. Then it's estimated that about 1/4 of all species on Earth will become extinct during this kind of 300-year window. And the idea is that, and most of that is attributed to what? Most of the current extinctions we see now are attributed to?
Humans.
Well, what are humans doing?
Industry.
Pollution's a part of it. Global warming's probably, climate change is probably a part of it. Industry maybe is a part of it. What?
Development.
What?
Animal trafficking.
What do we call that problem though? Poaching's a part of it, but that's still not the biggest issue. The biggest issue causing mass extinction is habitat destruction. So, yeah, Donovan, population plays into that and expansion plays into that, and that's what we're going for is habitat destruction. When you have 9 to maybe 10 billion people running around by the end of the century, then you're talking about a massive expansion into a variety of environments, especially where a lot of these areas are hot spots. A hot spot is a reference to an area with a lot of biodiversity in a small place. And so as people expand into those areas, there's a large number, and they basically are destroying these habitats. A large number of these species die because if you take away where an organism lives, what an organism eats, then you're really limiting its ability to survive. And if it can't move somewhere else and adapt, which a lot of species cannot because they're specifically adapted to one location, then they're going to die out. And so there's a lot of people who don't like call them environmentalists, the people who are trying to, conservationists, I guess you could say, who are trying to save endangered species. They're like taking DNA samples and doing all this stuff in case they become endangered so we can bring them back later. And some people are like I am with Mars, you got this giant red ball of dirt with hardly any water or any resources on it. And you got people spending time and money and energy wanting to go there. When in reality, we have like the best, most hospitable planet maybe in the universe for things to live. And we're not spending time and money and effort on maintaining this environment. We're worried about going somewhere else and creating something else instead of maintaining what we have. And so I suspect we will continue to see this problem on that trajectory as there's more and more people that grow throughout the world and people explore and they take over new habitats and kill out more things. And then all those other things like pollution and poaching, all that other stuff is also is knocking off stuff as you go. And so it's making it worse and worse. And one thing that we do that's really stupid is we bring in a lot of species from other areas that are not supposed to be in our location. So there's there's 4 words here for this. Okay, I'm going to go through all these and then we're going to make a distinction here. You might hear these: alien species, exotic, non-native, and invasive. Okay, so those are the 4 terms that you hear for species that are brought in that are not normally found in an area. Non-native, alien, exotic, and invasive. Which one of those is the worst? Invasive. So invasive means that when you think invasive, think invades. So it's something that's brought in and actually kind of takes over and kills out native flora and fauna found in that region. And we've got some really good examples around here. I know the 3 people out there watching on the internet, y'all probably have some examples around where you live. It gets warm and hot here in the summertime, so growth can occur really rapidly. And so what are some examples of invasives that we have to deal with?
Kudzu.
Well, okay, we'll start out with fire ants. So fire ants were brought here on a ship in the the teens or the 20s, somewhere in there. We'll say about 1920. From?
Europe.
Nope. South America. So there was a boat coming over from South America, and the idea is that probably somebody was bringing in some plants and stuff, and there was just a fire ant colony, and when they got off the boat in Mobile, then it got off, and they planted it somewhere, and they spread out from there. And so we're 100 years later, and basically fire ants, if you look at a map of them, they've taken over pretty much the entire southeast, okay? And it's funny because they've spread really. Well, it's not funny. It's weird because they've spread so quickly. Like my dad grew up in North Alabama, about an hour and a half north of here, and he grew up on a farm, and so he was farming probably in the 1950s. And I asked him one time, I was like, "Do y'all remember fire ants growing up?" And he's like, "No, we didn't have any fire ants." And so even like 30 years later, they hadn't spread to North Alabama. So it was a kind of a gradual spread throughout the Southeast. And then now, I mean, there's fire ants all over the Southeast. And so you have these colonies everywhere of invasive species. They've come in, they've taken over. People didn't even intentionally bring them here. They just came here. What were those hornets they talked about during COVID? Murder hornets. I mean, they're worried about those. They found a few colonies of those. What are some of the bad plants we have around here? Kudzu's the devil. What?
Weeds.
Well, there's a ton of what we would call weeds, but things that are specifically invasives. Kudzu, Chinese privet's a bad one. That's the hedge bushes you see a lot, and they have the little blueberries on them. They spread through runners. They spread through birds eat the berries, and then they pop them out everywhere. And so you have these things. I mean, like a large portion of Alabama forest have privet in it. What?
Bamboo.
Oh, God, bamboo. This may be the scourge of our day here. Like, people have been planting bamboo, and, like, once you plant that stuff and it starts running, I mean, it's going to take over the entire forest. It's really thick. Here's a good extra credit for anybody who wants to look it up. I'm curious, is there any native species that are actually eating the bamboo that's growing? Because I don't know that there are. You know, bamboo have the shoots. We don't have any pandas running around here. So I don't know if anybody's actually using that. And then it crowds everything out. There's a place in Double Springs where I grew up. There's like 3 roads that come together in like a triangle. And some moron in the middle of that triangle planted some bamboo. I don't know if it was for a border or they thought it looked good or what. But over the course of this is since I graduated. And so over the course of about the last 18 years, I don't know when this happened. Basically that it's probably 3 or 4 acre spot. So imagine like 3 or 4 football fields, maybe bigger, is just completely taken over, like 20 or 30 foot tall bamboo. You couldn't even walk through this stuff. And so all the native species there, I mean, there's nothing that's left there. It's just bamboo. And so the funny thing is, before that, it was mostly just kudzu, and now it's all bamboo. Whatever. So we've got our friends from the Asiatic continent coming over and invading the area with the Chinese privet and the kudzu and the bamboo. Fire ants coming from South America. We've got invasives like have y'all seen these videos with the silver carp? These are the fish when you're like driving the boat down the river and they stop jumping out of the water. You know what I'm talking about? And you see, flip over to page 504. This is what they look like. And these morons, they're always dudes. You guys know what I'm talking about. They'll have some dude dressed up in like full body armor with like a football helmet on, or like a motorcycle helmet, something like that. And he'll have a sword and he'll be riding behind a ski boat. You know what I'm talking about, Colby. And so when they drive through these carp, where these carp are, they'll start jumping out of the water to evade predators when they hear that motorboating sound. And some dude will be like slashing them up with a sword. Anyway, somebody died from one of those a few years ago, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago. Somebody was going down the river in their speedboat, going about 50 miles an hour, and one of them jumped out of the water, and I think it was hit like a little kid in the head. And like, imagine getting hit in the head by a 5 or 10 pound like fish going 50 miles an hour. I mean, it's going to do some damage. Anyway, so they've taken over. We also have zebra mussels is a pretty bad guy that you hear about a lot. I think these maybe came over from, does it say where they came from? I want to say Europe, but I can't remember. Anyway, so basically what happened with the zebra mussels is they came in on the bottom of ships. So like a ship would dock over somewhere else where they came from. I want to say Europe, but anyway, they came over, and then these ships go up the St. Lawrence into the Great Lakes, and then they drop off, and now they've just like taken over in the Great Lakes, these zebra mussels. And I know what you're thinking, like zebra mussel. Well, mussels are good because they help filter the water, so the more the merrier. But really what they've done is crowd out and taken over and pushed out the native species. And we see the same thing in the lower 48. There's a number of, if you go to like any kind of small creek or even in like rivers and stuff, you'll see little clams that are like about quarter size, that big around. They're pretty small. Most of those are Asiatic clams. And the story I heard was they were brought over in like the late 1800s, I think, by people coming over from somewhere in Southeast Asia. They brought them, they put them out like in a local stream or creek or somewhere to grow so they could use them for food, right? They like eating the mussels. Well, I mean, these jokers just spread and took over everywhere. And so they displaced a lot of native species. Kudzu, what was it brought over for? Now, these aren't all bad intentions, Jeremiah. You can have good intentions and then still do something stupid. Remember that when you get married, because you know what I'm talking about, Donovan. So, Kudzu, what was it brought over for? Erosion control. So they're like, you got this vine, it grows big, you can put it on the side of roads. They're building a lot of roads, and back in the early 1900s, and it'll prevent erosion. Well, the problem was they didn't know it was going to grow this well in the climate in the south. And so this kudzu, if you've never seen kudzu, I mean, just drive down 82 and this stuff's covering, it looks like this on page 504. Funny thing, so this property we brought over here, my wife, when we were cleaning out the house and going through stuff, we found an old plat map of the house. And it had like, we're going to plant this is like the people that bought it, they were planning out what they were going to do on their farm. And so they had like garden spot, pecan orchard, cows. And in two of the spots on the map, they had written kudzu. And so they were actually a part of that process of bringing kudzu in and planting it. And like, I still have kudzu I hadn't gotten rid of because it's almost impossible to get rid of. And the idea for them was, one, it's a nitrogen fixer, so it's good for the soil, like fixing nitrogen. Two, a lot of people, farmers, thought that they could plant it, and like on part A here on 504 in your book, they thought, we'll grow up and then we can use it for cows to graze. Well, the problem is you put cows on a bunch of kudzu, they're going to graze it down, and if the leaves can't put back out fast enough, the kudzu will die. So it's not really a good long-term grazing solution. And then it just spreads everywhere outside that region if you don't contain it, and it's hard to get a hold of. Now, I will say this one good thing about kudzu, Luke. If the apocalypse happens, you can almost eat almost every part of the kudzu is edible except the vine. So like the young shoots, the flowers, people make jam out of them. The roots, they kind of eat them, I think, like a potato-ish type taste maybe. And so there's a lot of edible parts. So if the apocalypse happens, you'll know where to go. And you know what I use them for, DeQuinte? You guessed it, feeding the chickens. It's high in protein, the leaves are. And so in the summer when I'm pissed off and I'm like out pulling kudzu because there's no way I can get rid of it, I just pick as many as I can, because these vines grow really quickly, and then I'll just throw them in the chickens, and the chickens love eating the kudzu leaves. All right, any questions? We should talk about some notes. Number 29, invasive species are species that live and sometimes thrive. I would say that if they're invasive, they're thriving outside their normal habitat. Invasive species can sometimes be beneficial, like kudzu. Yeah, sometimes on the side of a road, they do help with erosion. But they are considered invasive when they threaten or they hurt native species. When they are displacing native flora and fauna, then that is a bad thing, okay? Number 31. I think I went through 29 and 30 there. 31. Invasive species are often generalist or selected species. Generalist, if you remember back from August, which I'm sure all of you do, means a species that what?
It can live anywhere.
It can live in lots of different habitats. Anywhere maybe is a little too much, but lots of different habitats and
Climates.
eat lots of different things, especially if it's an animal. If it's a plant, yeah, it can live in lots of different habitats and lots of different conditions. So if you have organisms that are specialists that need specific habitats and it comes in and takes over, then really there's nowhere else for them to go and they die out. So there are selected species and therefore may outcompete the native species in that area. Now, the rule, I want to say the rule is it's like about 1 in 1,000 on average for an invasive species, where like if you bring 1,000 non-natives in, then about one of those will become an invasive species, because most of them just aren't adapted to the habitat where you bring them into, or they're not going to do so well that they're going to spread and take over. But occasionally you have your kudzu and then you got problems, okay? Another one, Luke, what do you like to go hunt for out in the forest? Wild pigs. Y'all know where, you might know what these aren't technically, they are invasives. Feral pig, what's the difference between a wild pig and a feral pig?
Feral pigs will attack.
I mean, they may attack. Wild means it's naturally found there. And I want to say these came from, I don't know if they were domesticated in Africa or somewhere in Asia, but I know there's a bunch of wild ones in Africa. I got one on the wall here. Say hey, Pumbaa. So anyway,
So sad. Pumbaa's my favorite.
it was delicious. So people brought pigs over. They domesticated and brought them over, and they were eating them because everybody loves bacon, right? And somebody, I think this was in like North Georgia, up in the mountains, kind of hill country. Somebody's like, "Hey, let's let a few of these out, and then we can hunt them as game later on in the year. We don't have to feed them all the time. See how they do." Well, these jokers took over, and down in the forest below town, there are wild pigs everywhere. Now, I will say this, they're difficult to hunt. Like in a hunting season, if I go out there 20 or 30 times, you probably know about this, Colby, you go out there a lot, right? Do you see many wild pigs? No. You might see some, but you don't see many. They go, when hunting season starts and they start hearing like trucks and stuff and they start hearing people shoot, they go nocturnal. And so during a hunting season, when I go out there 20 or 30 times, I might see a group of pigs like once. And normally when you see a group, you'll see like 15 or 20. They're called a sounder. But it's hard to kill a bunch of them. So I really try to I try to get rid of all the invasives I can. So I try to murder all the invasive pigs I can. But I mean, like, if you can shoot 2 of them, you're doing good, because once you shoot once, I mean, they're gone. And in the woods, I mean, it's hard to like lay down a bunch of them at a time. What they do in the forest is they'll have these big round like metal traps that are like a fence that's like 4 or 5 feet tall, and they have it off the ground. And so when the pigs get in there, if there's enough of them, then there's some kind of trigger, and they'll drop it, and it'll trap all of them. And so the game wardens will then just go in and like mow them all down. And I think they usually give them to people to eat. I mean, don't want to waste all that bacon, am I right? Oh, did you hear about the goats on the Galapagos? Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say.
Remind me about that.
At my old house, like there's just this we used to live in Weirdsboro. One night we came home and it was late, and we were hearing this sound, and it was like they were the boars or the pigs, and they were like screeching, and it was terrifying.
Ooh, hippos, yes.
What?
Galapagos goats. Yeah, I want to know about the goats.
Okay, so goats and hippos.
Here we go.
Okay, the Galapagos. There was a good, if y'all listen to Radio Lab, the podcast, there's a good one on goats there. And so, where are we going? Let me get through a few more notes and then we'll come back to it because this will make more sense. Okay, so we got down to 32. Invasive species can be controlled through a variety of human interventions. Sort of. I would say that there's a lot of invasives that are difficult to control. You can kind of sort of control some of them, like limit them. But I would say some invasives, it's almost impossible to completely get rid of them. I mean, like once they're there, the cat's out of the hat. You're not putting that what do you call the thing back in the box?
Cat in the box, cat in the bag.
Who knows? Who knows where cats come from? Cat's out of the hat. Let's see if it jumps. Once it's out of the bag, you're not getting that joker back in. It's like getting it back in the bathtub. Am I right? Number 33. You ever try to put a cat in a bathtub?
Yes. I don't want to.
That's how my cat died.
That's how your cat died?
Yeah. It was in winter.
Okay, I don't know if we can go back through that.
No, it's really quick.
Okay, later. All right. Somebody remember for Rachel to tell us how she killed her cat in the bathtub. 33. So let's go over to endangered species because this is going to lead me back to the goats and the hippos. Number 33, a variety of factors can lead to a species becoming threatened with extinction, such as being extensively hunted, Luke, having a limited diet where you can only eat certain things, and being outcompeted by native species, or having specific and limited habitat requirements. All that goes into being basically like a specialist species. Okay, so all of those things, that may have been 34 and, was that 33 and 34? Okay, 33. So all of that goes into factors that can cause species to become endangered or extinct. So let me go ahead and clarify here. So when you're talking about organisms and how few there are, you have like, if you look on like Wikipedia, any organism, most of them, it shows like how endangered they are or how many there are of them. And some it's like no concern, which means there's a bunch of them. And then it gets into threatened, which means there's less of them than there should be, and there's something to worry about. And then there's endangered, okay? And then there's extinct. Now, endangered even has like critically endangered, and threatened has a bunch of different levels of threatened. But critically endangered means they're almost all gone. And then you have extinct, which just means there's no more left in their natural range. So you may have some things that like get killed out, like tigers, and you may have a few in captivity, but it's almost impossible to take some of those captive animals and re-release them because you could never really teach them how to hunt and how to live in that environment once they're gone. So, yeah, where was I going? Goats. All right, back to the goats. So on the Galapagos, people were sailing around. So think of all these colonialists. They're sailing around their ships trying to conquer the world, blah, blah, and then Darwin we think of in the Galapagos. But these colonialists, they were running around on Her Majesty's ships, and they would a lot of times carry goats with them because, like, you could carry a goat and you eat one every now and then. The problem with goats is you have to feed them and you have to water them consistently because they're mammals like us. Well, they would get around the Galapagos, and a lot of times what would happen, they would throw off their goats and they would grab a bunch of turtles. And they supposedly had them kind of pinned off in a certain area because of some geographic features, but goats can climb anything and they'll get over stuff. Anyway, so on at least one of these islands, I can't remember the whole story, but the goats got out and they just were all over the island. And these sailors, they would grab the Galapagos tortoises. You know those big ones that are like big enough you could ride almost? Don't ride them, it's unethical. And then they got the long necks. They would take those tortoises, because tortoises were all over the place. They would take them, flip them upside down, and put them in the bottom of the ship. And then every time they needed something to eat, they just knock a turtle in the head and eat it. And they'd have turtle soup. Because turtles, you don't have to feed and water them for like a month or two. And so it was much easier to keep than a goat, and you didn't have to listen to all that band, right? And so anyway, so a lot of Galapagos tortoises are just wiped out. There's a few, 2 or 3 species that are completely gone. And there were a bunch of goats now on this island killing out other native species on there. So back in the late 90s or early 2000s, I can't remember, they decided, hey, we got to get rid of all these goats. They're killing out too many native species. So they came in with like helicopters, and they were just like mowing down. They were flying all over the place, just like mowing down goats. Well, there were some goats, Jason, that were just too smart to get murdered. Every time they heard the helicopter coming, they would go hide somewhere. And so what they had to do was they're like, we got to get rid of these goats or they're just going to come back. And so they would send out a goat with like a tracking collar on it. And the goats like to hang out with other goats. So it would go hang out with these other goats that were like really hiding really well. And so when they went out looking for it, they would track it down and then go in like the cave or wherever it was hiding under the rocks and then kill them all. And so there was a name for this goat. It wasn't really the scapegoat because you're not putting blame on it. It was just like the spy goat, maybe. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, they finally get rid of most of the goats. So that's a couple examples of where you have people getting rid of tortoises for one reason, because they're hungry, and then also an invasive species coming in and killing a lot of native species. And then another example we've got here that I'm sure you've all heard of. Jeremiah, since you're back in the saddle, read figure 1811 for us.
Overharvesting.
Overharvesting. This is where Luke's poaching comes into play.
Wait, what?
What happened?
Wait, what happened?
You interrupted.
Sorry, Jeremiah. Go.
As soon as he started.
I like what you said. Go ahead.
Okay. The dodo was a large flightless bird that served as an easy source of meat for sailors and settlers on the island of Mauritius.
Nobody knows how to say it. Don't worry.
Because it evolved on an island with no large predators or humans, the dodo has no instinct to fear humans.
Okay, so you basically had this big fat chicken running around, the dodo bird, and these sailors would come along, and you know what sailors are after a long time out at sea? Hungry. And so they're like, oh, look at this big fat chicken. I just go knock it in the head. It can't run off. It can't fly because the birds there didn't have any predators, so they'd lost their ability to fly. And they were just like eating these, just having a big festival. And then eventually, it's like, oh, there's none left. Oh, too bad. And then they moved on. I mean, I don't know that these sailors really cared about the environment or the overharvesting at that time. So anyway, then the dodo bird, it's all gone. So that's not planning ahead, Jason. Remember.
Wouldn't you like normally think when dangerous, you see a species that you've never seen before?
I don't know. I just imagine myself as a sailor who's being sent out, like I've probably been drafted by the Queen or whatever, or the military, and I'm out here and I'm doing whatever I'm having to do on the ship because I'm being made to. I come to an island and there's a festival of giant chickens that I get to eat. because I haven't had much to eat in the past, week or two.
No, I'm
Then I'm not like, there's only a few left. We need to leave a few for next time. I'm just hoping I make it back home to my wife and family without dying.
I'm saying like the dodo bird. Like, why would they not be afraid of humans?
Oh, well, I mean, they just never seen him before, so I guess
I'd be scared of something I've never seen.
like something big, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If it's bigger than me, I'm scared.
I mean, some animals are a lot more suspicious of things. Anytime they see you, they go running off, and some things just have more of like a herd mentality, and they group together, and they're not as fearful. They just had no reason to be like. There was no genetic reason to be ingrained in their brain to be fearful of anything because they didn't even have a predator. Just imagine where you don't have a predator, something comes up to you, you're like, whatever. I mean, like a cow comes up to us, we're not worried about it. Imagine if you were a human, you didn't know any predators, but then that cow, has big fangs and turns out to be a lion. Yes.
Interesting thing about the dodo bears is that when they eat berries to digest a lot quicker and stuff, they would eat like small rock pebbles, and the small rocks would crush the berries and stuff within their stomach for them to digest.
I'll be dang. Yeah, a lot of chickens do that too, where they eat little rocks to help crush up their stuff in their crop. Anyway, where do we get to?
34.
34. Not all species will be in danger of extinction when exposed to the same changes in their ecosystem. 35. Species that are able to adapt to changes in their environment or that are able to move to a new environment are less likely to face extinction. So basically what that's saying is some species are more adaptable than others. And when things come in, invasives come in, or people come in and develop an area, then some things are going to be more adept at surviving. I'll give, for instance, like deer. Like, I love to deer hunt, and they're kind of like the feral pigs. Colby can tell you. Once gun season rolls around, even like bow season, and they start seeing people out in the woods, those jokers go nocturnal. And I see it on like game cameras because I put a lot of game cameras out on my property. Like you'll see the deer out, they'll be frolicking and eating and whatever, and like it's hunting season. It's just like boom. You won't see hardly any bucks except at nighttime until the rut happens. And so they have this like fear that they have adapted to survive and not be murdered. Okay, some animals are not that smart. All right, it's the same way with hogs, right? We talked about hogs. Yeah. I mean, like some of them are just so smart. Like they know, like once hunting season goes around, go nocturnal. If you know Mr. Minute, I got a funny story where I tried to chase down a pig one time. We were hunting and kill it with a knife, but it didn't work out. All right, number 36. Selective pressures are any factors that change the behaviors and fitness of organisms within an environment. Selective pressures are factors that change the behaviors and fitness of organisms within an environment. I'll give you an example. And a good example to write down of this is stress. So if you're a particular type of animal and you're living in a forest and you don't have a lot of predators and you're just going about your thing, going about foraging for food and water and your normal day, then you're probably going to live and be happy and be okay. Now let's add in a predator, or like humans move into the area. And so now they're hunting you. And now you've had to alter where you're getting your food and when you're getting it from, when you come out at night. You're also under like high alert because you're stressed out about getting killed. Then, or even worse, like some other wild animal, like what's an invasive predator that somebody's brought into an area? Ooh, dingoes, like in Australia, right? Like, and so fire ants. Well, I don't want to get eaten by that either. But then you have some predator that you're worrying about, like eating you alive. That's never good. And so that constant stress is going to affect your ability to survive and reproduce. And so that can decrease the amount of those type of organisms in an area. Okay. Any questions? What did hippos. All right, hippos, then we're going to watch a video. We'll finish the rest tomorrow. So, Ian, and if we have enough time this week, Shelby, we will watch the video. Sophie, close enough. 2012 AP Bio, Shelby, and now you're in 2021 Apes.
I think it was 2011 when she took it.
Oh yeah, 2011, 12. I got that's when the 12 is when they took the test. Good thinking. I don't know how you know that though. What was I going? Hippos and cocaine. So who's the big cocaine dude in Colombia? He got in trouble. Pablo, you know what I'm talking about. Pablo had a lot of money coming in. Pablo is a pretty famous guy. And he was a bit of an eccentric, I guess. Anybody that brings in a bunch of hippos from Africa. So he had a bunch of hippos shipped over. He had like a big pond on his estate, and he put the hippos in there. Well, turns out hippos reproduce and do really well in the South American jungles. And so in Colombia, there's like hippos running around all over the place because they got out of the enclosure. Well, Pablo got arrested. Something happened to him. They took over his estate, but the hippos got out. And so there's hippos like running all around this town by where it lives. And so, and people like the hippos. I mean, I would be afraid like a hippo would eat my kid or something because they're like one of the deadliest animals in Africa, like attacking people. But apparently the South Americans have more of an affinity for the hippos. So anyway, they had the Colombian government was going to come in and just mow down all the hippos and kill them all, right? Let's get rid of these non-native species so they're not hurting native species and don't hurt anybody. You don't want to hit a hippo when you're driving down the road. But the people like threw a fit. Oh, they killed one and they posted a picture of it. Never post anything on social media. Post a picture and the people like around there threw a fit because they had some kind of affectionate tone for the hippos. And now there's more hippos running around. Anyway, watch out for the hippos. Invasive species, never switch continents.